The mountain stood silent, its winds carrying whispers of fear and doubt. On one side, hundreds of prophets of Baal shouted, danced, and cut themselves, desperate for their God to answer. On the other side stood one man, Elijah. Alone, yet not truly alone. His eyes burned with faith, his voice carried the weight of truth, and the heavens above seemed to lean closer to watch what would unfold. The crowd gathered on Mount Carmel, torn between two paths. Would they follow Baal, the god of storms and fertility, or the Lord who had led their fathers out of Egypt? The prophets of Baal cried louder, their frenzy rising with the sun, yet the sky remained silent. No thunder. No fire. No answer. And then, Elijah stepped forward. His challenge was simple yet terrifying, the God who answers by fire, he is the true God. The people gasped. Fire? From heaven? Could it happen? Elijah rebuilt a broken altar with 12 stones, drenched the sacrifice with water until it overflowed into the trench, and lifted his eyes toward the heavens. His prayer was short, but the silence that followed carried eternity within it. And then, the impossible happened. A roar like thunder. Flames tearing down from the sky. Fire so fierce it consumed not only the sacrifice but the stones, the wood, the water, everything. The people fell on their faces, crying, "The Lord, He is God." This was no mere story. This was a battle between truth and deception, between faith and falsehood, between the power of heaven and the silence of idols. Stay with us as we step into this fiery showdown, a moment when one man's faith lit the sky. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the epic journeys of faith, courage, and destiny. The land was weary. For 3 long years, not a single drop of rain had fallen. The once fertile valleys of Israel had turned to dust, and the cries of thirsty children echoed across the barren hills. Streams that once sparkled in the sunlight were now cracked riverbeds. Crops withered before they could bear fruit, and famine spread like a shadow across the nation. This drought was no accident. According to the scriptures, it was a judgment, a divine pause, called forth through the prayers of Elijah, a prophet of God. While the people cried out in hunger, their king, Ahab, and his queen, Jezebel, continued to lead them deeper into the worship of Baal, a god they believed controlled the rain and harvests. They built altars, carved idols, and filled the land with rituals meant to please a deity that remained as silent as the skies. But Elijah was not silent. Though hunted and despised, he stood as a lone voice of truth in a nation drowning in lies. He confronted the king himself, declaring boldly, "As surely as the Lord lives, there will be neither dew nor rain these years except at my word." To Ahab, Elijah was nothing more than a troublemaker, but to heaven, Elijah was a messenger, chosen to awaken a nation that had forgotten its God. Imagine the tension, a king's fury boiling against one prophet. Jezebel's rage demanding Elijah's death. And yet, Elijah walked with a confidence that could not be shaken, for he knew he was not alone. He carried a message, and behind that message stood the Creator of heaven and earth. As the famine grew unbearable, God commanded Elijah to show himself to Ahab once more. This was no small task. To approach a king who considered him an enemy was to walk into the lion's den. Yet Elijah obeyed. He stood before the throne and proposed a challenge that would settle the question once and for all: gather all of Israel, summon the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and meet him on Mount Carmel. There, the people would witness a contest unlike any the world had ever seen. It was a call to decision. Elijah's words echoed with divine urgency: "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." The people were silent. Their hearts divided. But soon, they would have to choose. Mount Carmel rose in the distance, its rocky slopes waiting to become the stage of fire. On that mountain, one prophet would stand against hundreds. One voice would challenge a nation's silence. And one prayer would ignite the sky. The scene was set. The air heavy with expectation. The drought, the famine, the silence of heaven, all of it was leading to this moment. The sun blazed high above Mount Carmel. The people gathered in throngs, their faces drawn with hunger and expectation. On one side stood hundreds of prophets of Baal, dressed in flowing garments, their eyes filled with fiery zeal. On the other side stood one man, Elijah, weathered by years of wilderness exile, yet unshaken, his eyes burning with conviction. Before them lay two altars. One for Baal. One for the Lord. Upon each altar, a bull was laid in sacrifice. The rules were simple, spoken by Elijah so that no one could claim deception. You call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The crowd murmured, a hush falling over the mountain. Here, under the blazing sky, the truth would be revealed. The prophets of Baal began first. From morning until noon, they danced, chanted, and cried out with desperate voices, Baal, answer us. Their words echoed through the valley, yet the heavens remained silent. No wind stirred. No flame appeared. The altar remained cold. Hours dragged on. Their chants grew louder, more frantic. They leapt around the altar, slicing themselves with knives until blood flowed, believing their suffering would earn the gods' attention. Still nothing. The sun dipped lower, and their cries dissolved into exhaustion. Elijah watched, calm and unshaken. Then, with boldness that cut sharper than their blades, he spoke, shout louder. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is asleep and must be awakened. His words pierced through the chaos, mocking the emptiness of their worship. The people watched, torn between fear and fascination. These were the prophets supported by their king and queen, men who had held sway over the nation for years. Yet, before their eyes, their rituals proved powerless. The altar of Baal stood untouched, its stones as cold as the silence that mocked them. By late afternoon, their frenzy had reached its peak. They collapsed on the ground, their voices hoarse, their bodies broken, yet still, no fire fell. No answer came. The heavens gave no sign. And then, Elijah stepped forward. Alone. One man against hundreds. He raised his voice so that all could hear, "Come near to me." Slowly, the people gathered around, leaving the prophets of Baal in their failure. Elijah's first act was not to call down fire but to repair the altar of the Lord, long neglected and broken. Stone by stone, he rebuilt it, using 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, a silent reminder of their unity under one God. Around the altar, he dug a trench. Then, in a move that defied logic, he commanded water to be poured over the sacrifice, not once but 3 times, until the trench overflowed. The crowd gasped. Fire consumes the dry, but how could it consume what was drenched? Elijah's actions seemed impossible, and yet, that was the point. This would not be the work of human hands. If fire came, it would be nothing less than divine. The mountain now stood silent once more. The prophets of Baal defeated. The people breathless. All eyes fixed on Elijah, waiting for a prayer that could change history. The mountain was hushed. The prophets of Baal lay in silence, their voices broken, their rituals exhausted. The people, torn between doubt and anticipation, pressed closer, their eyes fixed on the lone figure of Elijah. His altar, drenched with water and surrounded by a trench overflowing like a small river, stood as a challenge not just to men, but to heaven itself. Elijah lifted his eyes toward the sky. His voice rose, not frantic, not desperate, but steady, calm, filled with unshakable confidence in the God who hears. Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. For a heartbeat, the mountain held its breath. The silence was so deep it seemed the earth itself paused. And then, it came. From the heavens, a roar like thunder. The sky split open with blinding light, and fire, pure, consuming fire, fell. Not sparks, not flickers, but a torrent of flame, divine and unstoppable. It struck the altar like a hammer from the sky, and in an instant the impossible became reality. The bull was consumed. The wood vanished in fire. The stones themselves glowed red, as if molten under the fury of heaven. Even the water in the trench, gallons upon gallons, evaporated into steam, swallowed in a single breath of flame. Nothing remained but scorched earth and the smell of smoke rising into the sky. The crowd gasped, then erupted. Faces fell to the ground. Shouts turned to cries, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Their voices rolled like waves across the mountain. No argument remained, no pride could stand. The evidence was undeniable. The fire from heaven had spoken. Elijah stood tall, his figure framed by smoke and fire, his prayer answered before all eyes. This was not just victory, it was vindication. A nation that had wavered between two opinions now saw the truth with burning clarity. The God of their fathers was not silent. He was not distant. He was alive, powerful, and holy. But this moment of triumph carried with it a demand. The people could not remain neutral. Faithless worship and half-hearted devotion had been burned away. A choice had been forced upon them, seared into the very earth by fire. And Elijah did not hesitate. His voice, stern and unyielding, cut through the smoke, seized the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape. The crowd, ignited by newfound conviction, surged forward. Those who had once held the nation in their grip were powerless now, their lies exposed by fire from heaven. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in crimson hues that mingled with smoke rising from the mountain. On this day, Israel had witnessed the raw power of the Almighty, a display no man could deny. And Elijah, the lone prophet, had stood against hundreds and triumphed, not by strength, not by sword, but by the fire of the living God. The fire had fallen, and silence followed. Smoke curled upward from the blackened remains of the altar. The people were still on their knees, faces pressed into the dust, voices trembling with the cry, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" This was no longer a contest of words. No trick, no illusion, no argument could deny what every eye had seen. The prophets of Baal, once so loud, now stood pale and trembling. Their power was gone, their pride crushed under the weight of divine flame. Elijah's gaze swept over them. His face was stern, resolute, a man who carried not his own will, but the command of the living God. His voice broke through the stunned silence, sharp and commanding, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape." The people moved, almost as if carried by the fire still burning in their hearts. The very crowd that once hesitated now surged with certainty. Hands that had wavered in fear now seized the false prophets. They were dragged down the mountain, to the valley of Kidmin, where judgment awaited. There, by the river, their end came swiftly. It was not Elijah's personal vengeance, it was the cleansing of a nation poisoned by lies. The gods of stone and wood had no more hold. Their servants had fallen. What remained was the truth, burned into Israel's memory forever. As the valley echoed with judgment, Elijah climbed once more to the heights of Carmel. The smoke of the altar still lingered in the evening air, and beyond it, the land lay parched and cracked under years of drought. Yet in the very moment of judgment, mercy was stirring. Elijah bent low, his face to the ground, praying not for fire now, but for rain. 7 times his servant climbed the ridge to look toward the sea. 7 times he saw nothing but the endless horizon. But Elijah did not waver. On the 7th time, the servant returned with a whisper of hope, a cloud, as small as a man's hand, rising from the sea. It began with a cloud so small it could be dismissed. Yet within moments, the skies grew heavy. Winds rose, cool and strong. Thunder rumbled once again, but this time not with fire, with rain. The heavens opened, and water poured down, drenching the scorched earth, quenching the thirst of the land. The drought was broken. Judgment had been followed by restoration. The same God who sent fire to consume the altar now sent rain to heal the land. And there, in the downpour, Elijah stood, his cloak whipping in the storm. He had faced down kings, false prophets, and a nation's doubt. Now he witnessed renewal, the mercy of God pouring from the sky. The mountain that had burned with flame was now washed in life-giving rain. The message was clear: God's power is not just in fire that judges, but in rain that restores. He is not only the God who confronts idols, He is the God who renews hope. The mountain still trembled with memory, fire that had consumed the altar, voices crying out, the storm breaking across the land. Yet amidst the echoes of judgment and the roar of rain, one figure stood alone, unshaken: Elijah, the prophet who dared to challenge the powers of his age. The people had seen. Their eyes could no longer deny it. For years, they had wandered between two choices, half-heartedly bowing to Baal while still claiming the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the fire had burned away indecision. They had witnessed a God who answers, a God who is not silent, not carved of stone, not crafted by human hands, but living, consuming, and merciful. As the rains poured, Israel remembered. They recalled the covenant spoken long ago: "You shall have no other gods before me." The law written by the finger of God had not changed. And now, through Elijah, it thundered again, not on stone tablets, but across the sky, in lightning, fire, and rain. But Elijah himself was not a man of glory or ease. He was weary, tested, and deeply human. Soon he would run for his life, fleeing the wrath of Queen Jezebel. Soon he would sit beneath a tree, broken and afraid, whispering that he was no better than those before him. This is what makes his story so piercing: Elijah was not a superhuman figure untouched by weakness. He was a man of deep faith and deep struggle, and yet, God's fire burned through him. The true power of Elijah's story is not just the fire from heaven, but the reminder that God uses fragile vessels to display eternal strength. Through one man's courage, an entire nation was shaken awake. Through one solitary prophet, the idols of an empire were shown powerless. And yet, even in the midst of fire and storm, God's voice would later come to Elijah, not in the earthquake, not in the whirlwind, not in the flame, but in a gentle whisper. A voice of love, guidance, and hope. It was a reminder that God's power is not only in fire that consumes or rain that restores, but in the quiet presence that leads His people every day. Mount Carmel stands as a monument to choice. It asks every generation, whom will you serve? Will you bow to lifeless idols of pride, wealth, and false power? Or will you turn your heart to the living God, who answers with fire and rains mercy upon the land? The fire has fallen. The rain has come. The choice remains. And so Elijah's cry still echoes across time: how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him. The fire on Mount Carmel may have burned thousands of years ago, but its light still reaches us today. The story of Elijah is not just about a prophet and a fallen altar. It is about a choice, the same choice that confronts every heart, every generation. We live in a world full of noise, idols, and distractions. Wealth promises happiness. Power promises control. Fame promises immortality. Yet, like Baal, they remain silent when the storm comes. They cannot answer. They cannot save. But the living God still speaks. Sometimes in fire, sometimes in rain, and sometimes in a quiet whisper that reaches straight into the soul. Elijah's story reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but standing firm in the face of it. That one voice, when